I was getting a cup of tea. I was getting a cup of tea because I said, no, I'm gonna make this relaxing. So, yeah, it's November. Can't believe it. October absolutely raced by because of Inktober. And Inktober, you're probably sick of me going on about it on my channel by now, but people who don't watch shorts too much wouldn't have had as much exposure to me going on about it every day because Inktober required you to make images based on prompts during October. And I ended up with this. It's a storybook, an illustrated storybook, actually, really. Um, but I don't tell the story in the book. In the description under the video, I have two video uploads where I told the story. I told the story kind of halfway through up to day 15, and then I told the rest of the story up to day 31. And some of the reason why I made today a podcast as well is because I am going to be talking a little bit about Inktober because somebody came into the first of those two video uploads asking me, was the story that I made up to go with the prompts, was it based on Lord of the Rings? And I said, no, I don't think so. Because I've read a bit of Lord of the Rings. I haven't read the whole thing, but I have seen one of the films. But I don't think it's based on that. But it's a really hard question to answer because some of the sources of the story are mythological sources that turn up in a lot of places because the person said, it really reminds me of Lord of the Rings, the story you're telling there. I wasn't familiar enough with the story of Lord of the Rings because it's a long time since I've seen the film and I only read the first book in the trilogy. Um, so I wasn't really qualified to say how many elements of my story were Lord of the Rings, but I'm going to reveal today what mythological sources I did use. And I'm also going to talk about art sources for Inktober as well. And I think this is important to discuss because artists, you don't have to be aware of what where you're getting your inspiration from necessarily as an artist. But I think definitely for something like this, a project like this, it was really a kind of an illustration project because the challenges of if you were going to do it every day, the challenges of coming up with a work of art every day that was fine art for Inktober were going to be, monumental unless you were working in a very spontaneous, quick way, you know, which if you're figurative, you're probably not going to be doing. Um, and then the prompts, there's something about getting this series of prompts. It just invites you to tell a story. And that's what we do as humans. So I'm going to tell you where I got the story from. And um, I think it's an interesting thing for other artists to think about where do you get your stories from? How much do you know about those stories? And how much do you contribute to the story? And how does it become a new thing then? That you're not just telling the same story all the time. So the other thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you this new item, which I think is rather beautiful. It is a glass dip pen, and I particularly liked this one because the color in a certain light is in emerald green. And of course, I'm done emerald, haven't I? Um, but I was very curious about these. And because I was using so much ink over Inktober, I wanted to try out one of these. And you can get them fairly cheaply. This one was around about the €10 mark. And there are two different styles. The one I got has a spiral kind of a style to it. And in fact, on the cover, the cover of it sort of implies that the design is kind of supposed to look like a unicorn horn, which is appropriate, I think, as a little prezi for oneself at the end of Inktober. But of course, the real present for Inktober is um, getting so much work done, and it was a very satisfying experience. And for anybody who did Inktober who's watching this, could I just say, don't be downhearted about it if you got loads of traffic on your Inktober videos and then suddenly your traffic drops like mad after. Because I was expecting this because we've had this like various times before for particular topics, but it's going to do that. Everybody's resting after Inktober. Everybody's tired after it. So even your Inktober people who are coming over to visit all your videos, they're tired too and they need a little rest. So I'm thinking of this kind of podcast edition as a bit of a rest for me because I'm just yakking away. And some of it is about getting me ready to move on from Inktober, uh, but some of it is the finishing up of telling you, about my sources and everything for Inktober. And I'll show you a few of the pictures to explain what I'm talking about. So there are two of the things I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be using the glass pen. And in fact, I think I'll use it to explain some of the things I'm talking about my sources, because you want to see something happening during the live stream. So the other thing that will be happening is under here. I always have a mess at the beginning of the live stream because I'm trying to make this layout look semi interesting for you at the beginning, not empty. And yet you want an empty workspace to start, but not too empty because I'm going to be drawing some ivy today. I had another book underway, and I was nearly at the finished stages of this one. This is the Cozy Ant House book, which is a children's book, and I have to finish that. It's taken a bit longer than expected, but I'm hoping to have it finished within the first few weeks of November. In theory, it's for the Christmas market, if I was thinking in a marketing way, but in practice, I'll send away for the first test print of it, and it might be a couple of weeks before that arrives back. So, I probably timed it a bit late for any sort of Christmas market, but hey, I wasn't expecting huge sales on it anyway, so what the heck. And I'm having fun doing it, and I have progressed quite a way in it, and I am now on the pages which are cutouts of the actual little ant house that kids can make at the end after reading through the whole story, you see. And the plan is this story, I'm going to publish it in one of those photo books that are really designed to for people to print out their photos in and have a little book with all their photos in. But you can actually, there's nothing to stop you putting illustrations in there and using a photo book as a book. A lot of people do that. So I'm going to try doing that. And have I used a photo book before? I haven't. I've done books before. I have two books, and one of them had, well, both of them actually had illustrations. One of them only had one illustration in it. The other one had more illustrations in than that. But they weren't photo books. They were done in a different format. So the format is kind of a new format for me. So it's interesting. So what I have to do today is the way I did those cutouts was I made like little templates of, you know, prototypes of the way they stick together and where slits and things have to go in prototypes. And this bit of it is the ivy behind the house that the kids are making. You see. When I started off the story, I had a little picture of the ant house. This house exists, although the coalman came the other day and they plonked down a bag of, not a bag of coal, eco briquettes on top of it and broke the roof. So the roof on it is broken now. It's just barely placed on. So I have to actually stick the roof back on. But I have an ant colony out there in the garden with this little house in it. This is painted from life, drawn from life, and It's got the steps and it's got ants living under it as well. I actually have ants living in the house. I'm an ant keeper now. They're all in hibernation at the moment. I just have to throw them a little bit of nectar every once in a while and they're happy. But that little kid story developed out of that. So that was a source of inspiration, you see. So I'll be working on that. But perhaps I'll talk about the sources of inspiration for Inktober first. And we can try out the glass dip pen while I'm doing it. How's that? So we'll just put that aside for a minute and you'll see all this stuff under it, a whole load of writing because I have been doing calligraphy. Obviously, if you're doing little illustrated stories and making up your own stories, you can do hand-done calligraphy for it as well. Sorry, I have to have a sip of my tea before it goes cold. And I had bought various nibs, right? And I have a lot of new nibs that I'm using. That is a new uh, browser nib, steno nib. 681 is the number on that. Pumpkin blue steel nibs, they're called. But so I'm using calligraphy nibs. I use for a lot of the drawing that I did. I used a dip pen and I used an oblique holder to hold that dip pen. And the nib I was using, there it is, was an EcoG nib. I couldn't remember the name of it on the last video, but it's a very fine, very nice nib, lovely for drawing. So the glass nib I'm going to be trying doesn't really do that kind of thing, but we will have a look at what it does. And before I show you what it does, because I have had a little test of it already, I'm going to show you some of the art inspirations for Inktober. And you might be surprised to see that although I was using for not all of it, but some of it, a sort of what's known as a kind of a manga nib, popularized by people doing manga comics, that some of the things that really inspired me were very, very old things. So one of the things was Rembrandt, and I have a book in front of me of the complete etchings of Rembrandt. And I have lots of Rembrandt books, and I absolutely adore Rembrandt. And I was uh, delighted the other day. I pulled this book out. I've been looking at Rembrandt a lot during Inktober. I'll show you why in a minute. But I pulled this book out the other day and realised it had an envelope in the back. And I said, "What's this about? I don't remember this because I got this book years ago." And when I opened it up, I realised that it has quite a lot of posters tucked into the back of the book. So I was just so excited to see that. I don't want to hang up posters because I have so much art around the house. But it's nice to see those works really, really big. But I have to say, with Rembrandt, when you're looking at his etchings, you can even see on the cover of the book, it says reproduced in original size. Some of the etchings are tiny, tiny little etchings. And if I show you this one, this was the one that started me thinking about Rembrandt a lot. He just popped into my head during Inktober. And it was this etching that I thought of. This etching is called The Angel Departing from the Family of Tobias, and it's a dry point etching done in 1641. So isn't it amazing that something done in 1641 can be inspiring me in 2023? But if I show you some of the work in my Inktober little sketch pad that I ended up with. I just had to undo the buckle. I had repurposed a belt because it looked like it needed to be held together with something. Um, a lot of the styles of things in it were very Rembrandt inspired. And if you look at sort of cross hatching ways. I did cross hatching in some of the dungeon scenes in my little story. That was on um, day 21. The picture I'm showing people is the prompt was chains. So I had my prince in it in the dungeon, in the queen's dungeon. So there was a queen, there was a guy who was a knight at first, then he was a prince, there was a princess in it, and there were a lot of magical things happening. And one of the prompts was angel for Inktober, and another one was demon. So you can see in this Rembrandt picture that this is an angel flying out of the picture. And I just love Rembrandt because Rembrandt was fabulous at doing sort of comics, comic book style stuff. And this is the meatiest looking, earthiest angel you ever saw. And you just see the angel's feet and kind of up the angel's long robe as the angel departs in a puff of smoke away from these kind of humble praying, I don't know, rabbis and peasants and things, um, departing off from smoke of a fire and everything up into shafts of light up into the air in a big zoom. But it's done in a very comic style, and all the style of the faces and everything, it's done in a kind of a manga style, I think, and with this wonderful, very old master technique cross hatching, and the drawing is really masterful in it, you know. But they're very humorous, and he had such a good sense of humor, Rembrandt, and that is an aspect of some of the storytelling that goes on in comics, that it's about fantasy and humor and everything. And so is Rembrandt. So artists are always doing the same kind of thing, and that's a self-portrait little bookmark I bought myself, a self-portrait of Rembrandt there, um, a series of them actually, making different faces. And I think he must have been a wonderful person. I was in his house actually. I was lucky enough to go to his house, but he hasn't been there for a while. But he was very inspiring during Inktober. So I just wanted to show you that how some very old things can inspire your new work. And I'm going to talk about other really old sources now as well while I'm using my glass dip pen, because I'm going to talk about Arthurian legends. And the person that asked me what was my source for the story, was it by any chance um, to do with Lord of the Rings? I don't think so. But halfway through, because I didn't plan the story out completely at the start, the story just evolved with the prompts. I had to follow the prompts, so the story evolved. And it just went in the direction that was the direction of telling a story about a forest, a knight, a queen, a prince, because the knight was made into an evil frog prince by the queen. And some frogs, there were some frogs in it as well. So, a story like that, when you're telling a story, you're always going to be influenced by something. And it's stuff you've seen, heard, and your personality informs it as well. But for me, when I sort of realized, yeah, it's going in a very Arthurian direction, was I think from the moment that this turned up in it. The night that was in the forest fairly early on, um, what day are we on? Day 6, right? Day 6. This knight had found well, he hadn't found it. He had actually dropped a chalice out of his saddlebag and some coins. So he had stolen these. So that just kind of turned up as an image because that came in straight away after Path. But you see, the prompt for that was golden, was the prompt for that day. So that started the whole thing for me. So I clearly, once I had the previous day's prompt Path, and then that prompt golden, uh, it sparked some things for me. So, first thing it sparked was the idea of, and we'll write this down, okay? Because I think this is interesting stuff, and I had so much fun doing more reading about this stuff today. You can see my calligraphy is, well, you could say it's going well, but it's not going that well. Because I have pages of it done in this pad. They don't necessarily look that great. Have I got a page underneath that one I have? I want to make sure the ink doesn't go through. I bought a beautiful blue calligraphy ink for this today. So the first thing that came to me about this, there's the dip. See the way it clings into all those unicorn grooves, holding on to it. The first thing was this idea of the hero's journey. And that is a concept thought of by a guy called Joseph Campbell, who I've found interesting for a long time now. And one of the things we're going to test about this glass dip pen is how long it writes for. It writes very heavy at first, as you can see. I could go more sideways maybe and get it thinner. But so the hero's journey uh, is a quest. It's the idea of a quest. Okay. And if you have path turning up as a prompt and you have golden, you can see why the idea of hero's journey became something prominent in my mind if it was something that I found interesting anyway. Sorry, we need more tea here. So that what the hero's journey is that the hero, there's a story. Every story has to have a hero. If you're writing your own comics or your own little book or something, you got to have a hero or an anti-hero would do you. But this hero, and this theory kind of says this, that most stories are a hero on a quest. So I have a look at all whatever you're looking at on movies, TV, listening to on podcasts, reading about in books. Um, are those stories quest stories? Um, is there a hero or an anti-hero in them? And so a quest implies seeking something, doesn't it? So you've already got a narrative, you see. And this is Joseph Campbell came up with this idea that most mythologies, now you can see that the ink is still going, but it's running a bit lower. It worked up most of the grooves up towards the top, but it's still going. You see this piece of paper under it? That was one dip. So it'd be very nice for writing letters with, actually, if anybody writes letters anymore, for writing your stories about unicorns or whatever mythologies you're into. So, so the quest is seeking something, and most mythologies, world mythologies, various mythologies from different parts of the world, have this idea of a quest, a hero's journey in them. Hero setting out to look for something and having an adventure along the way. Okay, so you can see how for Inktober, this idea of it wanted to be a narrative for me. I'm a person that likes stories. I think, have we run out? No, not quite. Just depends on the angle you use the pen at. Nearly though. We're starting to run out. Um so adventure. So then from that point on, every day something else happened. I was gonna work it into this idea of the hero's journey and a quest story. So but I had started there, if you look at it already, because where I had the chalice that he'd stolen, and where I had the knight down on his knees in the forest with his steed, I already had him placed in a story because I had to clothe him, didn't I? So he had to be of a particular era. And the golden thing, well, the idea of the chalice just turned up because of golden. So, but I was already thinking in story terms, really, because that quest story turns up in the Arthurian mythological cycle, which is, I think it's actually Welsh, its origins, but it is a sort of a sort of a Celtic mythological cycle, because this features Arthurian stuff, features knights on quests for a grail. Um, and they're very interesting to read about, but they turn up in all sorts of places, in other places, because it's one of the most famous quest stories that there is. But the argument is that every novel that you read, according to Joseph Campbell, and people and I'd agree with this, there's only a few types of novels, and one of the types of novels is a quest novel, a hero's journey. And when you think about the way a story is told, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And usually there's a resolution at the end to the story. So there's a journey that happens in the actual story itself. So this made Inktober a lot easier for me and difficult in some ways because the prompts don't always suit you. But, we're humans and we can work anything into the right prompts. But the next day I was set up, you see, because the prompt was drip the next day. So it was a very wet day, and I had a very wet and dejected night the next day. But it was about this is when I didn't realize it was that Arthurian at this stage, okay? Because this was a very dejected knight who was just feeling depressed because it was raining, and he still had his chalice and was happy enough, but had lost his horse where somebody in the forest, and it turned out to be the princess, had stolen it. So he's sitting around trying to have a bit of a sleep in the forest, and she's made off with the horse. He hasn't realised yet, but it's lashing rain and it gets a bit uncomfortable sitting around in the forest in the rain. But that portal had also appeared in the forest. So there was a little portal in it. Now, when you think about what a portal is, it's a door, isn't it? And it's a place of passing into magic. So my unconscious already had a story, okay? And the unconscious is very important in mythology and in storytelling, which is what mythology is. And uh, so that portal was great because it meant that any prompts that came in after that, that the portal could facilitate their entry. And it was also my clue to myself that magic was going to happen in my story, that I wanted magic in the story. But when you look at it, see, I still wasn't really thinking Arthurian, even though I had knights, but unconsciously I knew it was, you see, because like I had a grail, which is a chalice. Okay. So that's the grail. So this is answering the guy in comments. This is answering your question now very specifically. The meaning of my story. The chalice in it is the grail. And the grail is about riches. So the coins that came with the grail were also riches. So this greedy knight had clearly stolen them somewhere. So there was a story, you see, before I started the story. You're invited to see the rest of an earlier story. And interestingly, I don't know if I would do Inktober again, but if I did it again, it occurred to me that I would make another story that grew out of this year's story. No matter what prompts somebody gave me next year, I would be reasonably confident I would do that because I know what storytelling is about and how it works. And you work in your own story into everything in your life. And your story is informed by uh, everybody's mythologies, world mythologies. And that chalice or grail idea, it's a very Christian idea, isn't it? But it might surprise you, unless you're familiar with Arthurian legends, that it's also quite pagan because um, in the Arthurian legends, you had Merlin, didn't you? And Merlin, I'm bringing him up now because Merlin was supposed to have been, he was the magician in the Arthurian legend, okay? And a lot of movies that we see that have a magical, mythological subject matter in them, they'll have a magician in them, won't they? Merlin was a magician that could see the past, the present, and the future, and um, informed King Arthur, the English King Arthur. Um, and bear in mind that this story was written about 500, 500 um, Christian era. So, like, I don't know, 400 years or something after the New Testament stories. And then got added to the next few hundred years with overlaid with more Christian stuff, pushing the Christian aspect of it as Christianity spread across Europe and everything. And, well, it had spread across Europe already, but that it was being pushed more and more organized and everything. So, but Merlin was terribly interesting because the guy that came up with the Arthurian legend that wrote it down first was a bishop, a Catholic bishop in England, and he introduced Merlin as born of an incubus, which is a demon. And although he was helping the king, King Arthur, who was thought to have been a real king, because a lot of mythology, same with Irish, and this is a Celtic based thing, often refers to um, people that either might have existed or can be proven to have existed. And the annals don't go back written in far enough for some of them to have been proven true. It's like, with Jesus Christ, it can't really be proven that he existed and that he is not just a story based on earlier stories. And this incubus thing, demon, was one of the prompts for one of the days. So that was great because that magic portal that I had, that referred to that. But it also refers to the Christian idea of the sinister or sinistra left hand kind of path and magic and everything. So magical things can happen in the forest if that door is opened, was the idea. Now I didn't just do an Arthurian story in that retelling the story of Arthur. I did it in a way that films and books do, and it did strike me that this book is underneath here because this book is Arthurian, never ending story. You might have seen the film of that. That's a kind of a retelling of the Arthurian Grail quest legend, except that King Arthur is replaced by a female character. But in the Arthurian legend, Arthur is an ailing king. He's like he's called a fisher king because he has wounds and needs to rest. And in fact, when I did a short video on this day 7 one, where it was dripping and raining in the forest, I think I put a Jeff Buckley piece of music on it, which is called um, him singing piece called Corpus Christi Carol. And it is a very Arthurian sounding song where it's about, wounded knight. And the story is that Arthur, the Fisher King, had wounds in his thighs and from his own spear, and was ill and needed to be made better. And the never ending story had the same idea applied to a little girl, that she was a ruler of a land, but she had to be made better somehow. But in the Arthurian legend, the Fisher King, he had to be asked the right question. And if you remember the Monty Python question, they went and they asked, I can't remember who it was they asked. I don't think it was the king, but they asked the question, and they asked a wizard the question. That was it. He was probably supposed to represent Maryland, but it's actually the king you're supposed to ask the question to. Um, but the question was, I actually wrote down the question. The question you were supposed to ask was, I'll get our dip pen out of this. I'm going to break this pen sometime because I'm great at dropping anything, dealt or glass. So, do you want to know what the Grail question was? The Grail question, right, is if you ask this question, it saves the king. So, the Grail question is, whom does the Grail serve? Oh, listen to that lovely scratch. That's the beautiful thing about glass tip pen, that scratch. Whom does the Grail serve? And if the king gives the right answer, his illness is cured. So, if there isn't a metaphor in that, it's all very psychological, this, you see. So, the answer to the question, of course, I don't know if this was always the answer to the question, but the answer to the question in the very Christianized version of it is it serves the Grail King. So who's the Grail King? Well, in Christian mythology, it's God, isn't it? The Christian God. Now, pagan stuff, it could have been another god or gods. And actually, I gave a nod to that in my book as well, my story. The first hint of it is here when some little frogs turn up, and they're little jester frogs, and they are coming and going from the portal. But uh, there is a castle involved as well, and the Grail King lives in a castle, not surprising. So our knight isn't a king now, remember. In our version of the story, it's a queen in the castle. But the Grail is traditionally kept in the castle. Now, we have a bit of an answer to the story, although I didn't answer it in my story. Where did he get the Grail from? Perhaps he originally stole it from the castle, that chalice or Grail. And the Queen, perhaps that was why she was so fed up with him and went to pursue him. But in the story, in my story, she pursued him. But all the trouble started when that portal got opened. And who opened the portal? The frogs did, really. Because I didn't have a Merlin in my story. I had some elements that were very Arthurian. Um, but the frogs once they went through the portal was open. So that's the portal to magic. So that's your bit where sort of Merlin is involved and everything. But in my story, instead of Merlin, the magical element is those little frogs, really. They're the real magic in it. And the princess has access to magic. And in fact, this guy does as well, because in this scene, he is, this was on day 12, and he was eating something spicy, and it was a mushroom kind of a stew made in a cauldron. And it was in question whether he was seeing this or not, but a demon was emerging from behind that portal, which is now open because the frogs coming and going. So this is a bit like the idea of Merlin's function in the story, which was to portend. Um, so to direct the king, basically. Which is interesting because Arthur represents what is good, right? But he can be swayed towards bad, because don't forget where Merlin came from. Merlin came from an incubus, a demon, born from a demon and a human woman. Okay? So it's the mixture of the unearthly and evil forces and the earthly forces. And so Merlin has contact with the other world, right? Whether you want to call it the lower world or the upper world is up to you. But he is directing Arthur for the good. But Arthur is kind of an ambiguous character as well, because he has kind of ethically forgot his path, if you like, and has to refine it. Now, the way they refined it is um, from the quest. And the Knights of the Round Table, who probably everybody has heard of, they're the ones that go on the quest kind of to find Arthur to help him restore the kingdom. Now, in my story, my sort of evil queen, I did have a little kind of a riddle at one stage, and a few people did try to guess this. So I'm going to tell you the answer now. And this queen on day, what day was it? Day 14, the prompt was castle. And I did an image of a queen lying in bed reading. Through the window of the castle, we saw her lying in bed reading. And I said to people on that little short video, this is from a particular historical reference. Does anybody recognize it? And a few people turned up and said, no, I don't know what that's from. Don't recognize it. It was actually Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor. I don't know if I'm spelling that right. There might be an A in there. This is all kind of European history, but it's mythology related as well, because Eleanor of Aquitaine, her hubby was off at the Crusades, so she used to probably spend a lot of time in bed reading. But she's reading kind of some not necessarily sacred scriptures there, stuff that hubby might have sent back from the Crusades, which is not entirely Christian. But she was of the right era, you see, and was a big ruler at the time. And a lot of this sort of mythological cycle, it was about rulers, how they ruled, and being able to tell when to fight, when not to fight, and things like that. And obviously, fighting is, going to turn up in this thing. Um, but interestingly, it's about the kingdom, really. And when you give in the sort of 11th, 12th century version of the Arthurian stuff, it's when you give the right answer, that who does the Grail serve, that the knights turn up and they should ask this, and they fail to ask it actually in the story at one stage. The correct answer that the Fisher King gives it serves the Grail King. Well, the Grail King being the higher power of the Christian God. Okay, so the kingdom is, there's your earthly kingdom, and then your spiritual or heavenly kingdom, and heavenly and spiritual are kind of the same idea in Kabbalistic thought. And in fact, in Kabbalistic stuff, um, tarot cards, for example, they have images of um, Jacob wrestling the angel, that he get the that the angel gives Jacob thigh wounds, right? And the king is supposed to have been wounded on his own spear in the Arthurian legend, okay? Um, and that self-inflicted wound is a spiritual wound, okay? And the reason, now this sounds like I thought it all out terribly careful, but it didn't. This stuff turns up semi-instinctually if you're somebody who's already read a lot of this stuff. And I didn't pore over Arthurian legends, but they actually turn up everywhere because they're stories that get told over and over in different forms. And this is what's happening on To the Night in the forest when he's having that drippy sleep the night it's lashing rain and he's all depressed and he's crying as well. He's spiritually wounded. And what I'm suggesting he's wounded from is being so influenced by earthly possessions, wealth, and fortune. And that is also the Queen's issue because she's very into power and fortune and wealth and, everything blingy, you know. So that makes for a great story, doesn't it? But it's the same story. It's the same kind of story being told. Even down to, I just went with it after a while, like, there was a dagger in one of the prompts, wasn't there? And that dagger, isn't it? Not dagger. That dagger, the queen gave it to the prince, who in this picture on day 15, I had turned into a frog because those little frog guys were in my story. They were the naughty little imps that sort of introduced you to the magic world, you see. And this is how we knew the knight was in the magical world. And the queen had turned the knight into a frog prince. So she's rewarding him for doing something for her, rewarding him in advance. But the something is a dagger. So this is quite another Arthurian theme because there are items in the Arthurian story that are, I only have 10 minutes left to tell you this bit, so I'll hurry up. The items in the Arthurian story are called the Hallows. So when you're questing for particular objects, but the objects can be spiritual things. And that's what the princess in the story, my story, was questing for. Because the queen was also a bling head, like the knight, who was into stealing things that didn't belong to him. But the princess was into kind of the forest and wanted to kind of stay in the forest at the end of the story because she was kind of anti-bling and into nature, basically, But the the one of the items, right, that the in the Arthurian story they were questing for was the sword. And we have a dagger, see? So you can see her wielding the dagger there to actually help save the prince who's being eaten by the queen in her dragon form. She became a questing beast of a dragon. which is another reference to very old mythology as well, you see. So, sword was one thing. A spear. We had a spear as well. The frogs have spears. And in fact, in this reference on day 24, I not only had the spear going on, um, because the spear obviously related to Christian symbology of the later additions to the Arthurian story, of um, the spear being the wound, symbolic of the wound, and also you see symbolic of self-inflicted wounds of the psyche. And in this, I also had the idea of Isis and Osiris, which is another version of the Jesus story of the resurrection. Basically, because when you read about that Egyptian mythology, um, he gets scattered to different lands, but sort of resurrects in fertility by making other lands fertile, and it has to do with dynasties. And crown was another of those four hollows items that you had to seek. And a cauldron. We had the cauldron as well, didn't we? Because we had the pot of nice mushroom soup that was the knight was eating. So that was the basis of my story, really. Frogs got their treasure. Everybody was happy. So no, it wasn't Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings was, as far as I know, and I'm not very well up on it. The mythological stuff that's based on is kind of Scandi, Nordic stuff, I think, and Norwegian. And I'm not very aware of that. I mean, you can draw parallels with all this different mythology, you see, um, because a lot of them are very similar to each other, because we do tell the same story over and over. But as every Irish person knows, we embellish the story. So that was the last dip pen, and we only have a few minutes left. Look how easy they are to clean, isn't that wonderful? Well, to be honest with you, ordinary dip pens are easy to clean as well. So I'm not going to get much of my little drawing done, but you got to see the glass dip pen in action. And I wasn't trying very hard to write well with it, but it could go fairly thin, but you would not be practicing calligraphy with it. You would be writing with it. So writing in a journal, or in a diary, or writing a nice book for yourself, or drawing. It'll draw okay, but you won't get a variety in the line very much. It'll go thinner than that at different angles, but it's not hugely controllable. You see, that's what the thinnest goes there. But it is very pleasant to write with, I have to say, because of that scratchy, very nice. And okay for drawing too. So for a cheap item, to see if you like dip pens, that might be a nice item. But for somebody like me, I'm probably going to break it. Whereas my other pens, oblique pen holder, is not an expensive item to buy. It's only about €5, and then the nibs are nice and cheap as well, but last ages, so they make better sense. And then you can get different nibs. The steno nib that I had there, the Brosa one, that's a flex nib, so you can get different widths of line within the same stroke by pressure. And obviously the glass did 10 when we done that with. But it is nice to write with, I have to say. Pleasant and easy. And the fact that you can write so much with it is very nice. So that's very successful. If I don't break it, I'll be happy. But look, it gives you a nice box with it. I think most of them do. I'm not even kind of going to share particularly the brand with you because most of the brands seem fairly okay. It does give you a little cover with it. Which goes back on because you don't want to be getting chips out of the top. And this is all foam in here. So our unicorn thing back in. And I would keep it in that box to have less chance of breaking it. So I hope you found some of those thoughts interesting. I think they're interesting to talk about because we're talking about how to construct stories. And I would not have been able to write this little cozy ant house story so easily. You see, if I didn't kind of know where my stories were coming from, what I find inspiring, uh, what overall kind of messages I want to get to the reader of it. And then if you're doing something that involves illustration as well, the illustrations and the stories, they have to support each other, don't they? So you kind of want to know what you're doing, but in another way, it is a spontaneous sort of a process. So yeah, I've only 3 minutes left. I'm not going to start doing this now at the end of the stream. It's not worth it. But so that was a nice start to November. Even if I didn't get the third thing of finishing this book done, I can do a little bit later. I'm going to light a fire though next, and I might put in another hour. Um, but really, it's kind of a getting over Inktober time. And as I said at the beginning, um, for anybody that's watching this who sort of joined me during Inktober and has a channel of their own or was posting their own Inktober things, because a lot of it was about sharing your images. Don't be down if your channels are a bit quiet over the next little while, because remember that everybody absolutely wrecked after all the work involved in October and need to chill out a little bit and have a like no think time for getting over October, you know. And for me, that stuff, reading about this morning, that was part of my chillaxing thing. It was very interesting actually. I ended up with looking at things about T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which was related to Arthurian stuff as well. So it took me to the Never Ending Story and The Wasteland and sort of Buddhist stuff as well. Was kind of related to it. It's in there in The Wasteland and it's in that Never Ending Story as well. I remember saying that to somebody once and they got very annoyed with me, but it was very obvious, you know, that were these mythological stories, the best stories, ask, where did we come from? Where are we going? And why are we here? And if you're an artist or an illustrator, or see yourself somewhere in between the two, um, you're going to be asking those kind of stories all the time, aren't you? And so if you've worked hard during October, take a little bit of a break to do other things. I've ordered a couple of books I really want to read, and I'm going to do some calligraphy, and I'm going to finish my book. So take time to do other projects or not do anything if you had a really busy time. And don't worry if you have a channel, if your channel dips a little bit, don't worry about it. Don't try. And this is just my personal thoughts, like do what you want, but uh, I wouldn't be too tempted to try and chase views by pumping out more of, if you think, okay, loads of people watch that kind of content. I'm going to make loads more of this kind of content then. You're an artist. So you tell your story the way you need to tell your story. And people will either listen to your story or they won't. You just keep doing it anyway, you know. And people do listen to stories. They like stories, you know. We'll always have time for stories, and we'll always even have time for the same stories told in a different and interesting way. So I hope you get some good stories in during the week, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care. Bye.